Hello Animorphs fans, and welcome back to the Animorphs universe. We're doing another AniTheory today, Lila, and it's a speculative one, of course, it's an AniTheory, but we're going to go into the courtroom discussing the Ellimist Hork-Bajir connection. What are you playing with now? Effectively, what the prosecution is trying to argue is that the Hork-Bajir are the Ellimist's main player. That the Hork-Bajir are his main goal, his favourite group, the one he says, that's my primary, the primary focus for me is the Hork-Bajir, and not, say, the Andalites or the humans or everybody equally. That the Hork-Bajir are his, basically, chosen people. Okay? So that is the argument we're putting forward today. Let's consider the evidence. And firstly, where did this idea come from? Well, it actually started when I noticed something in a couple of books. So I'm going to read you a series of, I think, 3 quotes, and that's where the idea came from. I dropped one wing and made a sharp turn. The back of our barn came into sight. Hork-Bajir. Need help, Jara answered. Toby say, Father, get human friends. Bring. We held each other until Toby and Jara had wrapped Han's body in blankets and taken him into the sunrise. Now you may be thinking, Adam, what are you talking about? Those 3 quotes seem entirely arbitrary and, what do you get from that? What do you notice about these 3 bits? And the thing that I noticed, putting my prosecution's hat on now, is the Hork-Bajir know where Cassie lives, and they know their way to and from Cassie's home. What's the proof of this? Well, those quotes basically show Jarahami comes to Cassie's home without Cassie's knowledge. So he's found Cassie's barn and he goes to her, and the eventual happening there is that he tells Cassie, the Yarn are here. So he's gone to Cassie's house to say to him, this person is here, we need you to come back to our place, okay? You also have from book 36, so Han Tunad died, and Toby and Jara are both there, and they eventually take Han back to be assumedly buried somewhere, or however the Hork-Bajir handle their dead. They take him away on their own without any of the animals going with them. So another case of the Hork-Bajir knowing where Cassie lives without need for guidance. And you can assume that they took Han Tunad there and told Cassie, because it was Cassie that called Jacob saying, apparently, like, Toby's turned up with this going on. So this is what got me thinking, because the Hork-Bajir know where Cassie lives. We never, before this happened, in books 34 and 36, we had no indication that the Hork-Bajir had been shown where Cassie lived. This is the first time it happened. Jara just turns up at her house. Why do the Hork-Bajir know where Cassie lives? And it got me thinking about Toby Hammy, because Toby speaks at a level far higher than any of the Hork-Bajir she lives with. And in one of my favourite fan fictions, The Earth Diary of Toby Hammy, she learns by Tobias. He brings her like newspapers and books and all that sort of stuff, and she reads them. But I think something similar has happened here, but instead of it being Tobias, I get the feeling it's Cassie. Because Jara goes to Cassie's place saying, Toby said to come here. So whether she gave him directions, that's possible. How would Toby know where Cassie lives? Perhaps Cassie, on the sly said, hey Toby, if you come to my place, I'll give you some books. You gotta be sneaky though. But then you'd think, why doesn't Cassie go to the Hork-Bajir Valley, which has less risk? There's a lot of questions there. But overall, what we can say for certain is that the Hork-Bajir know where Cassie lives for certain, and they go to her to say stuff. They don't tell Tobias, they tell Cassie. She is the one that they go to over everybody else. Now, we never, outside of this, we're never shown that Cassie and the Hork-Bajir are like bezies. We tend to think it's more Tobias who has this thing going on with the Hork-Bajir where he's really, he's great friends with them, and that's the communication. But this indicates to us that it's actually Cassie who cares for the Hork-Bajir and has this whole thing with them. And then we see this confirmed basically at the end of the series, in the beginning, after the war. Cassie was Undersecretary of the Interior for Resident Aliens. It paid less than I spend on corn chips, but hey, Cassie was 17, like me, and she was meeting with the president and spending most of her time with the free Hork-Bajir. They had been given Yellowstone as a habitat. They lived on bark and cared for the trees, and the tourists loved it. Cassie sort of moved from that position in the beginning to spend more time with the Hork-Bajir, and it's made pretty obvious that she went to live in the area where the Hork-Bajir were, and got a boyfriend, Ronnie Chambers, and they did stuff with the Hork-Bajir. So she maintained a connection with the Hork-Bajir, and that's the whole reason Jake said to her at the end, don't come with us on this mission to rescue Axe, you've got to stay with the Hork-Bajir. So Cassie, by the end of the series, is tied to the Hork-Bajir very tightly. So before we move on to how this involves the Ellimist, let's just summarise this point. Let's put a staple in that so it's absolutely certain going forward that this is a thing. Cassie and the Hork-Bajir are entwined more than we see in the books. And I believe that is possibly because she is giving Toby tuition, because the Hork-Bajir can't. I don't think Tobias is doing it, I think it's Cassie, and that's why the Hork-Bajir know where Cassie lives. Because somewhere in the background, outside of what we read in the books, she's brought Toby to the barn for whatever reason. Because Toby's not going to find the barn just on her own, is she? She's not like following the Animals as they sneak off thinking, right, I just need to find out where Cassie lives. No. Cassie, for whatever reason, will have shown the Hork-Bajir to her barn. That is a certainty at this point. And then she's obviously the one that gets attached to the Hork-Bajir at the end of the series, so she has this thing going on with them. Okay? I think we can be certain on that. What I'm also going to take into account is a previous AniTheory we did, which was that Cassie is a part of the Ellimist, in the same way that the Ellimist created an Andalite and sent that Andalite down to the Andalite planet to live amongst the Andalites. I think Cassie is very much a part of the Ellimist, that he's implanted part of herself in this girl and set her on her way to, do his bidding, effectively. And I'm not going to go into the evidence for that in this video. I will link to that particular AniTheory at the end of this video. Go check that one out. Put a pause on this part if you want and go watch that so you get the evidence for that. But what I'm going to take into account here is that Cassie is inherently tied to the Ellimist and what specifically he wants. Basically, she is part of the Ellimist. So I'm building the foundation of my argument now. Cassie, being part of the Ellimist, is in the background got this inherent tie with the Hork-Bajir. Now that doesn't prove my point. That doesn't, what's the court saying? That doesn't prove the affirmative that the Hork-Bajir are the Ellimist's chosen people. No, we're just establishing the foundations at this point. Let's now start to look at the Ellimist himself. Let's see what his ideals are, his ultimate goal. He gives it to us in the Ellimist Chronicles, of course. Life was everywhere. 1,000 planets teeming with life. Most of it very primitive, but why should that stop me? I could step in early. I could intrude, in Menno's phrase. And yet, I would intrude with exquisite sensitivity and the purest motivations. I would create harmonies, boldness allied with restraint and a minimalist aesthetic, all in the service of moral certainties. That peace was better than war, that freedom was better than slavery, that knowledge was better than ignorance. Oh yes, the galaxy would be a wonderful place under my guidance. So the Ellimist, as we know, if you're an Animals fan, you know about the Ellimist. He loves a bit of peace. He loves a bit of understanding. He loves a bit of, He probably listens to Imagine by John Lennon a lot. That's probably his favourite song. He actually created a race, that race being called the Pemalites. And as far as the series Animorphs go, they were the most peaceful, gentle and loving race of the bunch. There was basically nothing bad about them. Until they created the Chi, of course. But that seems to be the Ellimist's thing. He loves peace. He loves gentleness. And that's why he created the Pemalites. But obviously there were problems with the Pemalites and they eventually died out. But they were his toy, basically. And he makes that pretty obvious in the Ellimist Chronicles. What we're arguing for in the court today is basically that the Hork-Bajir are the new Pemalites. They are effectively the Ellimists created people that are like his pride and joy. You know, everything else is cool and whatever, but this one in particular, this is my favourite, and I've designed them to be my favourite. Essentially, what humans are to the Christian ideal or the Abrahamic religion's views of God are. You know, God created everything, but on the last day, he created them specifically, and boy, howdy did he like them. Okay, that's sort of what we're going for here. That's what the whole case is. But originally, the Ellimist created the Pemalites to be that group, and then Kryek came along and completely buggered that up. Okay, so Ellimist is without the Pemalites now, and he's seen what the Chi have become, a bunch of double-crossing buggers, so he's probably a bit bitter about that. Like, damn it! But the Pemalites eventually made the Chi, and they suck, right? So at some point, he probably thought, I'll make a new race, and they'll be called the Hork-Bajir. I'll make them indirectly, because as the Ellimist always says, we do not interfere. So he probably made the Arn make the Hork-Bajir. Who knows? Or maybe, think about it this way. So, what happened to the Hork-Bajir planet? It got hit by an asteroid, basically, and got blown up and blah, which is probably Kryek's doing. And then the Ellimist would come along and say, nah, my new thing in life is to create more life. This is all in the Ellimist Chronicles, by the way. I haven't actually written the quotes up. I'm just brainstorming at this point now, so apologies for not having these quotes up. But the Ellimist then came along and said, aha, my new motto in life is that, yeah, you can just destroy things, but I'll just make it so that there are more things alive. So he goes to this planet and says, all right, we'll help the Arn survive, but in the process, we'll make it so that the Arn come up with this idea of, hold on, why don't we just make these new creatures who are gentle, peaceful, and all that sort of stuff. And let's not forget that, aside from the Pemalites, who are the most gentle, peace-loving, fun-loving group? It's the Hork-Bajir. Put them side by side, the Pemalites, and they are very similar, with one difference. One big difference. The intelligence level. Okay? That's the one big difference between the Pemalites and the Hork-Bajir. So let's get back on track now, because I've gone on that particular tangent, but I think it's a nice, useful little tangent to go on. Let's get back onto it now. The Hork-Bajir are entirely enslaved by the Yeerks. And in the Ellimist Chronicles, you know, Kryek would do something to a race, and at one point it said to the Ellimist, you know, you can fix that race, or you could follow me and try to save the next race. And the Ellimist tends to do that. So at this point you'd think, you know, if the Hork-Bajir were just another race and they were lost to the Yeerks, the Ellimist would, you know, he would prioritise. But no. Once I put you and your friends in a position to give your own former species a chance, I looked deep into the future and found a way to help you, without using my powers directly. And now you're in a position to help the Hork-Bajir. Do they not deserve the same chance as humans? You're trying to save the Hork-Bajir race from the Yeerks? The Ellimist smiled again and shook his head. We do not interfere. We do not use our power for one species against another. Now, he could be being truthful here, that he doesn't prize one group over another. But this is the Ellimist we're talking about, and he's a bit of a manipulative sod. I mean, even there, he's saying to the buyers, I gave your former race, basically humans, a chance for surviving, so now you do the same for the Hork-Bajir. Is that what he really did back in Book 7, or is it just a way to get the animals out of a sticky situation? and basically to introduce himself to the animals. You could say that, but now he's directly saying, I want to save this race. Basically, if you rescue these two Hork-Bajir, they'll bring about a faction, and that will eventually lead to the Hork-Bajir being a free race. That's essentially what happens. Has he done this with any other group? I mean, we don't know, and you can't prove a negative, so we can't say that he never tried to help out the Mac or the Nahara. Maybe he did, but we've got no solid proof of that. We never even see those races, to be fair. But he strikes this deal with Tobias, and the aim is to get free Hork-Bajir. And that's eventually what happens. They rescue these Hork-Bajir, and then what do you know? These two Hork-Bajir, one of them being a descendant of the two leaders of the resistance on the Hork-Bajir planet, funnily enough, they have a seer child. How coincidental. This seer child, Toby Hammy, is the leader of the Hork-Bajir and will eventually have a major impact in this war and then be sort of the shield for the Hork-Bajir after the war, when, you know, humans and Hork-Bajir have to coexist. So, what happens next in the story? The Hork-Bajir are returned to the homeworld as a resistant faction, because the Arn comes along, this one remaining Arn.
I am Quaffajinavon,
he said.
The species you claim to know is no more, and I am the last of the Arn. Recently, I intercepted a Yeerk transmission and learned to my amazement that a free Hork-Bajir colony existed on Earth. I risked everything to steal a Yeerk ship and have travelled a great distance to find...
Do you know the location of the colony? Jake interrupted.
No,
Quaffajinavon answered.
I found it myself. We Arn long ago developed technology to track her.
What exactly is this plan of yours? Rachel demanded. The Arn shot her a quelling look, clearly displeased to have been interrupted a second time.
My plan is to collect samples of the DNA of the free Hork-Bajir. With their permission,
he added quickly,
I would then use the DNA to create a new colony on my home planet, to regain their planet, to regain what the Yeerks took from them.
And from you, I thought. I'm usually pretty good at figuring out people's motives, but I wasn't sure what the Arn's deal was yet. Was he trying to help the Hork-Bajir? Or was he trying, somehow, to help himself? This one Arn comes along, saying he is the last of the Arn. He is all that's left. And he comes down and says, I want to restart the Hork-Bajir resistance on the home planet. To which, of course, the animals and the Hork-Bajir eventually agree to, and they use Aldra's Ixilla to help find a weapons cache on the home planet that Aldra and Dak left behind during the war. Throughout this book, there's this whole thing of, do we trust this Arn? Both Cassie and Aldra have this feeling of, can this guy actually be trusted, especially Aldra? And there's a few times where the book deliberately tells us, should we be suspicious of this guy? The Arn had stayed at the helm, ignoring us for the most part. I had learned nothing more about him. Was this really some voyage of redemption for him? Aldria doubted it, and she knew 100% more about the Arn than I knew. We were given all these little hints throughout the book of, this guy's not to be trusted, not to be trusted, not to be trusted. Why would we trust him? Aldria, who knows the Arn perfectly well, says this guy's up to something. What happens by the end of the book? Everything goes as the Arn suggested it would. And there's no moment of, we should have trusted him all along. It's just sort of left unresolved in a way. It's strange. But also you've got to factor in the fact that the Arn says, I'm about to die, basically. I'm in old man! Effectively. Quaffajinavon's small red mouth pursed disapprovingly.
I have very little time, humans. No time at all for pleasantries. I will live for only 412 more days, give or take a few hours. That is a biological fact.
So this old Arn comes down, he says, as the last of my race and as a sort of redemption thing, I'm going to give the Hork-Bajir one more chance. That's what he's saying. Which, to be fair, maybe, but why? Why? He's about to die, the Arn are all gone, the Hork-Bajir, as far as he knew, were no more until he got this call. How did he get that call? We'll get onto that. There's some weird stuff about this guy, though. Some very weird stuff. Like, he is a biologist. Okay. And he has a lab that he scrounged together, apparently, over a long period of time by himself.
It took me years to piece together all the equipment I needed for a new lab,
Hork-Bajir said.
The Yeerk raids destroyed almost everything.
So, we will go into speculation in a sec. I just want to put one more thing at you. And it's the weirdest thing of all about this Arn. Because all we know about them, you know, Hork-Bajir Chronicles and basically everything we know about the Arn, they specialise in hard, factual biology. You know, they are very down to earth, or whatever the planet is called. It's like a series of numbers or something. Very down to that planet. Look, if you're going to come up, Lila, come up. There, better. And then they've got there's no indication that there's a spiritual, magical side of these creatures. No indication that they do magic. And then he starts to do it.
The Atafalxicle must be performed. It is the only way to unlock the Exilla. But the ceremony of rebirth will not succeed unless there is a strong receptacle mind available, a mind as strong as Aldria's own.
Even Aldria seemed to have her doubts about the ability for the Arn to use this magical technology. Do you remember an old Arn storing your Exilla? I asked. Yes, she replied. I agreed to have my persona harvested, although I didn't think the Arn are really advanced enough to make a successful transplant. So, Aldria's Exilla remembers this Arn coming to her. It's not specified whether it was multiple Arn or just this one. But she did think, I wasn't sure that the Arn were capable of doing this. And she knows that the Arn are very big into biology and all that sort of stuff. And then this one thing, she's a bit like, I was a bit sceptical about this. And we should all be, because these very scientific creatures, the last one comes along claiming he's the last one, saying, I'm 400 years old. And then starts doing voodoo, like literal voodoo. He's in a cave going, whoa, whoa, and brings down the ghost of Aldria, who takes hold of Cassie's mind. It's like witchcraft, and it just seems so out of place for the Arn, does it not? We've never seen that before. We've never been given the indication that the Arn were into their voodoo and their spiritual stuff. I mean, you could argue, well, maybe it was like a scientific thing, but this vial of goo, just because it's in a vial of goo doesn't make it science. If I put a liquid in a vial, that makes it science now. No, it doesn't. It's voodoo stuff. It's magic. It's mumbo-jumbo. It's superstitious. And that's not something we've ever done with the Arn before. It comes completely out of nowhere. So, in conclusion, we are to believe that the last Arn came down who said, I'm about to die, so I'm just doing this for redemption's sake. I'm giving the Hork-Bajir a chance. And then he starts doing magic. It's very, very sus, is it not? One wonders whether this may not actually be the last Arn. Maybe it's an indirect thing going on. Because what happens then is the Hork-Bajir apparently have a new resistance on the Hork-Bajir homeworld. We never hear from that resistance again. We can assume that they just created another distraction for the Yeerks, which would eventually lead to their empire falling apart. We can probably assume that. How did this Arn, who is ancient and old mane, manage to rebuild a whole laboratory whilst also practicing voodoo You know, those two don't tend to match. You don't see many laboratory building scientists who are also professional mediums, really. I mean, maybe. But not only that, but this Arn was capable enough to steal a Yeerk ship, hack their transmissions, and find out that there was a Hork-Bajir colony on Earth. How the ruddy does he manage to do that? And this also plays into another AniTheory that I will get onto at some point. Right, here we go. So this is going to be an AniTheory for the future. The war rested on one pivotal individual who was set into motion, who was deliberately chosen, and who, without, the series would have ended completely opposite. Okay? Who is that individual who was so pivotal to everything in this war? Who's part of the Ellimist plan and whatever have you? Beck. From book 23, The Young Lost Hork-Bajir, Beck. That's an AniTheory for another day. Just, you know, spoiler alert. Why is that relevant to in this case? Well, if it weren't for Beck, the Arn would have never heard about these Hork-Bajir, effectively. So he steals a Yeerk fighter and overhears them saying, "Oi, in this 542, do you remember that Hork-Bajir colony that is on Earth?" "Oh yeah, I remember them." "Why did we have this conversation?" And in the background, the Arn is like, "Set thrusters to maximum." Why would he steal a ship? I mean, how did he get hold of the Yeerk transmissions? Why would he get hold of the Yeerk transmissions? Why would that be a thing? A whole bunch of questions that we do not have answer to, and it's entirely speculative, but we can just take the facts as we know them. And they're freaking weird, and they don't seem to match up with reality. This voodoo scientist lab building old man Arn builds a laboratory, steals a ship, and here's this transmission, and boom, down he goes to Earth with this redemption idea in mind of, I'm gonna give the Hork-Bajir another chance. That's what we're working with. You tell me that somewhere this guy isn't fiddling with things. You tell me that. Now, there's another speculation, but it's to do with my fan fictions, and spoiler alert for future fan fiction, this isn't the last we see of Quaffajinavon. We see him again in book 65, actually the next one I'm going to be writing, so, you know, wink wink, nudge nudge, go read my fanfics. So there is that, okay, so putting that down. And there's just a few more bits of evidence I want to throw at you. Pretty much entirely from the Ellimist Chronicles. There's just a few strange little coincidences that form a pattern. Okay? Let's look at pre-Ellimist Ellimist. Tumin. What was he? He was a Ketran. Where did the Ketrans live? The surface of Ket is quite inhospitable to most life forms, covered as it is by acid seas, lava flows and strangle vines. But Generation 9561 were gamely wandering around in environmental suits, taking samples when one of their air skimmers accidentally ran smack into a mast of the Great Southern Polar Crystal, and a first contact was made that surprised everyone. Life? On a vast crystal floating 300 miles above the planet's surface? Impossible. But then we'd have thought the same if we'd been the first to arrive on their world and found them down amidst the trees and rivers and so on. The planet that the Ellimist originated from is called Ket. What was the name of the Hork-Bajir that Tobias saved, who gave birth to Toby Hammy? Ket. Same name. Could be a massive coincidence. It is very coincidental that the Ellimist set this plan where the Hork-Bajir, two Hork-Bajir, one of them is named Ket, basically the same name as the planet that he was originally from. It is a big coincidence, and you just let it go as that at this point. But there's other stuff as well. forms that little pattern that we need to see in order for it to be more than just a coincidence. Let's just look at the planet itself, the description of the planet. It's on the outside. From the outside, it looks inhospitable. And Generation 9561 come down and say, this place is icky and gross and we don't like it. And then suddenly, they find the Ketrans and they find this glorious thing that isn't obvious on the surface. What does that remind you of? Does it remind you of the Hork-Bajir? The Hork-Bajir up to book 13 are described as these monstrous looking killers. And even though they're told at the start that the Hork-Bajir are gentle, peace-loving creatures, you remember the animals that start with like, yeah, right, what have you been on? And they are seen as these awful things. I mean, Tobias says in book 13, I used to hate and fear them. Then they encounter the free Hork-Bajir, and suddenly they see the floating, beautiful crystals. Or the equivalent of that. They see, hold on a minute, these Hork-Bajir aren't as we originally perceived them. Actually, there's a lot more good stuff here. It is good. That's very similar to Generation 9561 finding Planet Ket and thinking, this place is, it looks crap. And then they find the crystals and suddenly it's like, oh, actually, we were completely wrong. So there's parallels there as to, seeing the Hork-Bajir and judging them by their first appearances, but then as you delve deeper, you find, actually, it's not like that at all. There's one other set of coincidences as well. And let's introduce it by a quote. What stories do you tell? I asked, cringing a little at the possibilities. I felt like I was asking great-grandma to tell me about her youth, Like the result wasn't exactly going to be Party of Five. Story of Father Deep, story of Mother Sky, Ket Halpak suggested. Father Deep and Mother Sky, Ket Halpak says. What does that remind you of? I am Father, Lakaver said. He was gazing down at me from his dock above. Old 42. I'm the life of this planet. All that is here comes from me, belongs to me, is a part of me. All power is mine. I lost to Inidar, lost to Wormer, lost to Aguela. I had lost in a different way to Menno. By resisting his call for adaptation, I had led the last of my people into Father's snare. And I had lost to Father, in the end, by becoming Father myself. What was I, after all, with all Father's victims contained within me? I was but a high-tech version of Father. We raced for the blue moon and used the thin atmosphere for braking. We had to shed nearly all of our speed before we could safely enter the water. The Explorer skimmed at subsonic speeds just 10 feet above the glass smooth sea. So, Mother Sky and Father Deep. Mother Sky is a bit more... There isn't many... I haven't got any quotes for that. But all we've got to do is consider, where were the Ketrans born? In the sky. Who gives birth? Mothers. Mother Sky. The Ketrans were born in the sky, Mother Sky, yada yada yada. There's more for Father Deep. What is Father Deep on the Hork-Bajir planet? It is this mysterious underworld, hidden by blue mist. And if you go down through the blue mist, you find monsters. But eventually, what you find is the race that created everything. The race that created the Hork-Bajir live down in Father Deep, who controls the whole planet. What do we see in the Ellimist Chronicles? We have this creature called Father, and he lives on a blue planet. They find him by going beneath the blue of the sea, and he controls everything, but he's also a big monster. That's quite a parallel. And not only that, but we get the part where Tumen is saying, or the Ellimist, is saying, I became Father. I became the monster. Which is another parallel to the Hork-Bajir Chronicles, because what happens in that book? The Hork-Bajir find they go into Father Deep, and they come out wielding the monsters of Father Deep, and they resort to killing. So they basically become Father Deep. There's so many parallels here that I don't think it's just a coincidence that Ket is called Ket, that Father Deep and Mother Sky are the way they're called, because there's too many parallels between the Hork-Bajir Chronicles and the Ellimist Chronicles for that to just simply be a coincidence. What I'm trying to say, what the prosecution in this courtroom is saying, is that there are basically the Hork-Bajir are made up of all these things Tumin has in his head, of Tumin's past. Everything about the Hork-Bajir is based on something that has happened to the Ellimist in his past. Almost like he wrote them using his own experiences. And it's probably a convoluted way of saying it, I know, but I hope you get what I'm saying. You get what I'm putting down. Everything about the Hork-Bajir seems to be a parallel to the Ellimist's story. His past. That's what I'm basically saying. And I think there's too much coincidence there. And I think that there is definitely something there that is trying to be said. One of the only good things that came at the end of the series. I know we got the end of the war, and that's the good thing. But what is it that Jake says to Cassie when he leaves? What is it that he uses as, this is a good thing? He says, we've rescued the Hork-Bajir. That's one of the only big pluses we get at the end of the series, because all the animals are screwed. There's still bad stuff going on. But the one big positive that they take away is, we saved the Hork-Bajir. Was that the Ellimist's big game all along? So now we're going to take it to the jury, because that's pretty much all my evidence covered now. And what does the jury say? Guilty vote means that, yes, we can be pretty certain that the Hork-Bajir were the Ellimist's chosen people, sort of created indirectly by him, and they are the ultimate, I want to save them. Not guilty means that basically there isn't enough evidence to say that. So what we're going to go for, this little thing here is my gavel. Okay? So, how do I rule? Not guilty. I don't think there's enough evidence to say this for certain. Doesn't mean that it isn't a guilty, but at the moment, you know, because we operate on innocent until proven guilty. Well, I do anyway. And yeah, I don't think there's enough there to say that this was the intention. It's possible, but we just don't have, unless you can point some out to me. If you point some out to me, I might render a different verdict, but at the moment, that's how it is. It's very interesting though, and there are a few questions, even if it's a not guilty verdict, there are still a few questions that you got to look at and think, that's a bit strange. What's actually going on there? Why is that like that? And who knows, maybe a new AniTheory will come out of this somewhere down the line. What are your thoughts and feelings on this subject? Do you agree with the verdict, or do you disagree entirely? Yeah, tell me. Remember to subscribe, like, and all that sort of stuff, and I shall see you again next time. Probably to do the Beck one, because it's a strange one. It'll be a short one, but yeah, I genuinely do have a feeling that Beck was one of the most pivotal individuals in this series. So, thank you very much for watching. I shall see you for the next one. Ta-ra from somewhere in the Animus universe. Bye.